Imagine opening your inbox in the late 1990s. The internet is still a new frontier, full of promise and a bit of mystery. Among the messages, one stands out. It's from a Nigerian prince, or a government official, or a wealthy widow. They have millions of dollars trapped in their country and they need your help to get it out. For your assistance, they're offering you a huge cut, a life-changing amount of money. All you need to do is provide your bank account details and maybe a small upfront fee to cover some administrative costs. It sounds too good to be true, right? Or for thousands of Americans, it was a trap they walked right into. This is the story of the Nigerian email scam, one of the earliest and most infamous social engineering attacks that swept across the globe, and how it laid the groundwork for modern cybersecurity. Back in the 1990s, the world was just getting acquainted with email. It was a novel form of communication, and for many, it carried a sense of legitimacy and urgency. People weren't as skeptical as we are today. Pop-up ads were a nuisance, but the idea of a sophisticated international financial scam conducted entirely through digital messages was almost science fiction. This lack of awareness was the perfect breeding ground for what would become known as the 419 scam, named after the section of the Nigerian criminal code that deals with fraud. The scammers weren't just random individuals. They were organized groups who had perfected the art of storytelling and psychological manipulation. The letters themselves were masterpieces of persuasion for their time. They were filled with dramatic tales of political turmoil, secret fortunes, and urgent pleas for help. The narratives were just plausible enough to hook people. They often referenced real events in Nigeria, such as military coups or the death of a political figure, to add a layer of authenticity. The scammers understood a fundamental aspect of human nature: greed. They dangled the prospect of immense unearned wealth, and for people facing financial struggles or simply dreaming of a better life, the temptation was overwhelming. They weren't targeting the ultra-rich, they were targeting ordinary people, retirees, small business owners, people who could be convinced that this was their one big break. Here's how it worked. The initial email was just the bait. Once a victim replied, showing interest, the real game began. The scammers would build a relationship, sending more emails, sometimes even making phone calls. They created a web of convincing characters, bankers, lawyers, government officials, all supposedly involved in the transaction. They would send fake documents, stamped with official-looking seals, to further cement the illusion of legitimacy. Then came the requests for money. It would start small, a few $100s for a transfer fee, then $1,000 for an anti-terrorism certificate, then more for bribes, taxes, and unforeseen complications. Each payment was presented as the final hurdle before the millions could be released. This is a classic social engineering tactic known as the sunk cost fallacy. The more money a victim invested, the harder it was for them to walk away. They'd already put in thousands, so what was a few thousand more if it meant finally getting the promised millions? The scammers were experts at exploiting this. They would string their victims along for months, even years, draining their savings accounts, retirement funds, and sometimes pushing them into massive debt. The emotional toll was just as devastating. Victims felt a deep sense of shame and embarrassment, which often prevented them from reporting the crime to authorities or even telling their families. The scale of the problem was staggering. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the FBI was issuing public warnings. They estimated that these scams were siphoning hundreds of millions of dollars from the U.S. economy every year. It wasn't just individual victims who were at risk. The FBI warned that the sheer volume of fraudulent transactions could potentially destabilize smaller banks that were unknowingly facilitating these wire transfers. The scammers were not just a nuisance, they were a significant economic threat. The U.S. Secret Service even established a task force specifically to combat Nigerian fraud schemes, working with law enforcement agencies in Nigeria and other countries to track down and prosecute the perpetrators. But catching them was incredibly difficult. The scammers operated from internet cafes in cities like Lagos, using anonymous email accounts and routing their communications through multiple countries. They were ghosts in the machine. Even if authorities could trace an email back to a specific location, the person who sent it would be long gone. This anonymity was the scammers' greatest weapon. They could operate with near impunity, preying on a global pool of potential victims with very little risk of being caught. This explosion of online fraud forced a massive shift in how we thought about security. Before the Nigerian prince, cybersecurity was largely a concern for corporations and governments, focused on protecting networks from hackers. But the 419 scams demonstrated that the weakest link in any security system wasn't the technology, it was the human being using it. This realization gave birth to the field of cybersecurity as we know it today, with a much greater emphasis on user education and awareness. Companies started training employees to spot phishing emails. Antivirus software began incorporating anti-spam and anti-phishing features. The public slowly became more cynical, more cautious. We learned to question unsolicited emails, to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true. The Nigerian prince scam became a cultural touchstone, a punchline in movies and TV shows, But behind the jokes were real people whose lives were destroyed. We hear stories of individuals who lost their entire life savings, their homes and their families. The psychological impact was immense, leading to depression and, in some tragic cases, even suicide. These stories serve as a powerful reminder that behind every scam there are real victims and real-world consequences. It's a lesson that remains incredibly relevant today. While the classic Nigerian prince email is less common now, the tactics have evolved. The social engineering principles remain the same, but the stories have changed. Today you might get a text message about a package you didn't order, an email from your boss, asking you to buy gift cards, or a romance scammer on a dating app who slowly builds your trust before asking for money. The methods are more sophisticated, the stories more personalized, but the goal is identical: to manipulate your emotions and exploit your trust for financial gain. The legacy of the 1990s Nigerian scams is a world that is, by necessity, more digitally aware. It forced us to develop a healthy skepticism of the online world. It taught us the hard way that when an unknown prince from a faraway land offers you a fortune, the delete button is your best friend. So, the next time you instinctively delete a suspicious email without a second thought, you can thank, in a way, the Nigerian scammers of the 1990s. They were the pioneers of internet fraud, and their reign of digital deception created the very antibodies we now use to protect ourselves online. It was a costly lesson, paid for by the life savings of thousands of innocent victims, but it was a lesson that shaped the digital world we navigate every day. The war against online scams is far from over, but it was here, in the early days of the internet, that the first major battles were fought. Thanks for watching. If you found this story interesting, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the history of technology and culture. Let us know in the comments if you remember getting one of these emails back in the day. Stay safe out there, and see you in the next video.